All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most important numbers on any company's books, its inventory. The stuff on the shelves. It seems so simple, but how a business puts a price on that stuff, well, it can completely change the story its finances are telling. So let me just ask you this. Imagine a company's books say they've got 100 grand worth of products just sitting there ready to go. Is that what those products are really worth? Is that the number you should trust if you're thinking of investing? You might be surprised to hear that the answer is not always. Yeah, that's right. The value on the books and the value in the real world can be totally different. And understanding why there's a gap between those two numbers is absolutely key to figuring out how healthy a business really is. This isn't just some textbook exercise. This number has real-world consequences. So, you're probably wondering, where does this gap even come from? Well, it all boils down to one simple, but actually kind of tricky question about what value even means. Think about it. Do you value something based on what you paid for it, the historical cost? Or do you value it based on what you think you can get for it when you sell it in the future? These are two completely different ways of looking at it, and they can give you two very, very different numbers. And this is where accountants bring in their tools. To solve this puzzle, they use two key numbers. One is called cost, and the other is net realizable value. Okay, so first up is cost. This one is pretty straightforward. It's not just the price tag on the item. It's the total amount of money the business had to spend just to get that item onto their shelves. So that's the purchase price, plus any delivery fees, which you'll sometimes hear called carriage inwards. Now, on the flip side, we have net realizable value, or NRV for short. This one's looking to the future. It's the price you expect to sell the item for. But, and this is the critical part, you have to subtract any extra costs you're gonna have to pay to actually sell it. Things like fixing a scratch or paying for special packaging. So now we've got these two different numbers. Cost, which looks at the past, and NRV, which looks at the future. They're both telling a different story. So, how on earth does an accountant decide which one to use? Well, this leads us to one of the most foundational rules in all of accounting. Which number should the business actually write down on its official financial statements? The price it paid or the price it hopes to get? The answer comes from a core idea called the principle of prudence. Now, that sounds fancy, but all it really means is that accountants are supposed to be cautious. They should never be overly optimistic. The whole point is to avoid making promises you can't keep or showing profits and values that might just disappear. It's about being realistic. And that brings us to the golden rule of inventory valuation. It's simple. You figure out both the cost and the net realizable value, and you always pick the lower of the two. Always. This one simple choice makes sure that a company never overstates how much its assets are worth or how much profit it's making. Okay, that's the theory, but it's way easier to understand when you see it in action. So let's run through a couple of real-world examples. Okay, let's look at Chen's problem here. He bought an item for $15 and paid $3 for shipping, so his total cost is $18. Simple enough. He thinks he can sell it for $24, but oops, it's damaged and needs $8 worth of repairs. So that means its net realizable value is only $16. Now we compare the two, $18 cost versus a $16 NRV. The rule is crystal clear. You have to value that item at the lower number, which is $16. Now, that's pretty easy for just one item. But what about a whole store that's full of different products? Well, you just follow the same logic step by step. You calculate the cost and the NRV for each type of item. Then, for each one, you pick the lower value. You multiply that by how many units you have, and then you just add it all up for a final total. So let's try this with a full inventory from May's art supply store. As you can see, she's got paintbrushes, packs of paint, and a few easels. And here's all the data we're going to need. How many she has, the costs, any delivery fees, and what she expects to sell them for, including any selling expenses. Okay, time to crunch the numbers. For the paintbrushes, the cost is $2 and the NRV is $4. For the paint, the cost comes out to $27 and the NRV is $29. But look at the easels. The cost to get them in the store was $35, but because of those selling expenses, the NRV is actually only $32. And now for the big finish. We apply our lower of rule to every single item. For the paintbrushes, $2 is lower than $4, so we use 2. For the paint, $27 is lower than $29, so we use that. But for the easels, their NRV of $32 is actually lower than their cost of $35, so we have to use the $32 value. We multiply each of those by the number of units, and we get our final, prudent, honest inventory valuation of $2,420. So there's our number. We went through all that work, but why? What happens if a business just ignores this rule? What's the real danger of getting this number wrong? I mean, you might be thinking, come on, what's the big deal if it's off by a little bit? Well, it turns out the ripple effects of getting this number wrong are actually massive. First off, it hits your profit directly. If you value your inventory at the end of the year too high, your profit for that year will also look artificially high. It paints a false picture of success, and the problem doesn't go away, because that closing number becomes the opening number for the next year, so the error just flips and messes up the next year's profit too. It's a domino effect. And it doesn't even stop there. That mistake flows right onto the balance sheet, the report that's supposed to show the company's financial health. If you overvalue your inventory, you're also overstating your company's assets and its capital. You're basically telling the whole world, investors, banks, everyone, that your business is worth more than it really is. So let's wrap this up. What's the big takeaway here? Number 1, always value inventory at the lower of its cost or its net realizable value. Remember, this whole thing is about being prudent and making sure you're not overstating your assets or your profits. Getting this number wrong has a huge, direct impact on a company's financial results. At the end of the day, this one number tells you a lot about a company's financial honesty. And that really leaves us with a bigger question, doesn't it? This whole principle is about forcing a business to ground itself in a cautious, measurable reality, not in optimistic hopes for the future. It makes you think, when you're looking at any company, what's more important to you, the reality of today or the promise of tomorrow? Thanks for joining The Explainer.